The iMore Show is brought to you today by Betterment, the automated investment service built on the idea that investing intelligently should be intuitive, automated, and accessible to everyone, whether you have a $10,000 or $10 million. For a limited time, listeners can get up to 6 months of free automated investment managing by visiting betterment.com/iMore. It is Thursday, July 3rd, 2014. I'm Rene Ritchie, and right now we're going to talk all about iPhone, iPad, and Mac, and a little bit of news about iMore. Imagine that. This is the iMore Show. The iMore Show is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website, portfolio, and online store. For a free trial and 10% off, visit squarespace.com and enter offer code iMore at checkout. A better web starts with your website. It is July 10, 2014, and today we're going to discuss iTunes extras everywhere. Finally, we're going to get close to the metal with Peter. We're going to talk about some accessibility stuff, and Derek Kessler is joining us to burn everything to the ground. This is the iMore Show. So first and foremost, we have Peter Cohen with us. Peter, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you, Rene?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And in order to make sure that he stays in the podcasting game, that he does not resort to a life living under his brand new desk, we have Derek Kessler. How are you, Derek?
I'm not liking life out from under my desk.
You went through this beautiful process. It transpired on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram of building a gorgeous new standing desk. I was highly impressed with your skills.
If you're impressed with those skills, you're easily impressed.
I am very easily impressed, sir.
Yeah, I had no woodworking experience whatsoever when I started doing this. I wasn't sure which end of the planer went up, and I'm still not entirely sure I got it right, but I have a desk.
And you're standing.
You can't see it because it's here. But yeah, it was an adventure and a half, but now I have a standing desk, which I'm told is better for my health and all that stuff. I feel more productive, I guess. I can dance.
But you're not a clown made of candy.
No.
All right, so let's start with today. So I woke up imagining this would just be any other day, and then lo and behold, Apple pushed out an iTunes update. It was iTunes 11.3. And it had a very confusing list, a changelog, a list of updates in it. It said that iTunes Extras was now available in HD, which made little sense to me because I'd had HD movies downloaded for a while that had iTunes Extras. But it also said that the Apple TV update, that was at 6.3, Derek?
6.2, which came out a week ago.
Which came out a week ago, would enable iTunes Extras for the Apple TV, and that iOS 8 would do the same for the iPhone and the iPad. Now, Apple was incredibly kind to me this year. I made this wish list of features that I really wanted to see in iOS 8, and I put it up before WWDC. And I think almost every single one of those, with the exception of iTunes Extras on the Apple TV, were answered at WWDC. But Apple answered them today. Derek, I can go to my Apple TV right now, press a button, and Avengers pops up with a menu for extras.
I'm so happy for you.
That's not enthusiastic. Peter, do you care at all about iTunes Extras?
Not a damn bit, I have to say, and I'm sorry to say, but no.
The only director's commentary that I'm interested in is the movie itself.
What I appreciate, though, Rene, is your enthusiasm for the subject. This has been a thorn in your side for a very long time.
And I will never have to read another blog post on it again.
So here's the thing. I love how things get created. I love director's commentary. I love behind the scenes. I love to see how the product, like the production department worked on the show. I love to see the sketches. I love to see all that, the deleted scenes, bonus features. And until today, you had to, like an animal, go back to your Mac, download the movie and the 4 gigabytes usually of extras files, and then watch them that way. And yeah, you could AirPlay them to your Apple TV, but it was such a kludgy workaround. So now there's a fundamental change, and it's not well explained by Apple. But what's happened is what we used to know as iTunes Extras are now iTunes Extras bracket original bracket. They're the old sort of extras. There's a whole new kind of iTunes extras, and these kinds have some advantages. For example, on the Mac, you can stream them now, so you don't have to download the entire file anymore. And that capability is what's extended to the Apple TV. So not all of the movies that had the original iTunes extras have the new ones yet. So some movies you go to on your Apple TV, you'll notice the little iTunes extras blue flag icon, and other ones you won't. But the ones that do have them, those are the ones that are available on your Apple TV and will be available on iOS. The one thing that I think could be better, though, is, for example, Derek, if I just go to Apple TV and I go to purchases, not only does purchase take longer than ever to load, but there's no information beforehand about which movies have extras. You have to actually go movie by movie into their detail sheet to see that, and that to me seems inefficient.
Do you actually want to have your cake and eat it?
Yes, I want to have my cake and eat it knowing there is a second slice of cake.
Because that is the point of cake, is to eat cake. I've never understood that phrase. But yeah, it's the first step, and I imagine since, the Apple TV is it's a tiny web interface is all it really is. They were able to just switch this on a week after having pushed the 6.2 update to the Apple TV, that it shouldn't be a terribly difficult issue for them to say, you know what, we need to put that badge in the listing. Or they might also just be like, nobody really cares about these until we do a proper relaunch and make it such not a pain to actually use iTunes extras.
So here's the thing, and what's interesting, Peter, is that Apple has shown this ability, and we talked about this before, to dump things in press releases. This is even lower than a press release. This isn't, new iMacs are available. This is, we're updating iTunes, and by the way, here's some stuff that works on things that aren't iTunes at the same time. There's all these rumors about a new Apple TV, a better box. That's probably been pushed out to the spring. This wasn't announced at WWDC. It's not being announced at whatever event Apple has in the fall. This was really an en passant, a by-the-way Apple drive-by update.
Pretty much, yeah. And, Apple does this from time to time, so it's not terribly out of character.
It's not, but it's still... yeah, I mean, that's totally fair, but I mean, unless you're people like us, you probably didn't even read those updates, and you may not know that kind of stuff is available. Like, the Apple TV doesn't even tell you.
This is true, but there's something to be said for discovery of new features, too.
Yeah, and it has
it's exciting for you, Rene, but realistically, how many people do you think really care about this?
There could be special features in a Godzilla movie, sir.
Yeah, that's true. That's true, and I guess we'll find out. I'm still sore about Pacific Rim being available in ultraviolet, when I bought the Blu-ray DVD pack, so I don't know. Maybe I'm just less excited about this than you are for that reason.
Yeah, so the way it works, if you're not familiar with it, you go to the Apple TV, you pick the movie you want to watch. If it has iTunes extras, you'll see that little blue icon in the top right. You press a button, and now instead of taking to the movie, you get sort of that WebKit interface that's familiar from the Mac. So it's a full-screen piece of art. The music starts to play, and you have the play movie and the extras and another button. I forget what the third button is. But you tap on the extras, and then you get a whole new menu system that, again, has big artwork, almost like a DVD menuing system. And then on the side, it has deleted scenes, featurettes, and it has sub-menus, so you can get into more features. I am taking this, regardless of how little you Peter Cohen, or you, Derek Kessler, care about it. I am taking this as an epic, epic victory for all of mankind.
Absolutely. No question.
If only it had happened on Independence Day.
What can I tell you? I care about this about as much as I care about World Cup soccer.
Ah, so bad. We've got a couple questions already. So Mickey Sun wants to know, do you remember a thing called iTunes LP and what's happening with that? iTunes LP was announced at the same time as iTunes Extras, and Steve Jobs did the announcement, and he was talking about how much he loved album art and how he would ride his bike to the music store and get album art and drive home and soak in the music while reading it. And initially, Apple pushed out both iTunes LP and iTunes Extras. And the original Apple TV, the one that was still based on OS X and had a hard drive and didn't do streaming but syncing, had support for iTunes Extras and iTunes LP. But Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, we have not heard a peep about iTunes LP in years from Apple.
No, absolutely not. It seems to have gotten kind of pushed by the wayside. Yeah, absolutely.
I think LP's been pushed to the wayside by just the modern music landscape. People don't want to buy albums anymore. They want to buy just individual songs and maybe a set of songs from an album, but the album is more or less dead today, with few exceptions. So the whole concept of album art and everything that would come packaged with the album just doesn't appeal to people anymore.
It appeals to Taylor Swift.
I think that part of it is, that there's nothing. As much as Steve Jobs is clearly in love with the idea when he first introduced it, it's not really compelling content for people. It's basically just gussied up web content that's associated with these albums.
Mm-hmm.
It's HTML, it's CSS, it's JavaScript. It isn't something to make somebody starry-eyed about using iTunes. It's just something to supplement, their basic experience. And as Derek points out, the commerce of iTunes is based on a very different concept, where you're just downloading tracks that you want as opposed to downloading entire albums. So iTunes LP strikes me as something very anachronistic. That's distinctly different from iTunes Extras. There's actual value in that, I think, for people because it's additional content that they don't get otherwise. For completists like you, Rene, it gives you a chance to check behind the scenes at your favorite action movie to understand how they did effects or whatever it is that they want to share, just like the extras and the bonus content that's available on Blu-rays and DVDs. So, from that perspective, it's great. iTunes LP, though, I think it was kind of a... I don't want to say it was a foolish idea, but it was an idea that was mired in a very old way of thinking about the way that people purchase music.
It wasn't as bad as the Apple Hi-Fi.
Well, but also I think we've seen a lot of data that people are moving increasingly away from purchases not only of LPs but of singles towards streaming services, towards the Songzas and the Spotifys and the Pandoras and the iTunes Radios and the Beatses. I sound like Gollum when I say that. Away from those things and towards the streaming things. And the whole idea of iTunes LP, I think, breaks down when you're basically listening to radio or on demand.
Exactly right. Fewer and fewer people are actually buying music in favor of streaming services. So, again, it's not something that's compelling enough to make people want to buy content that way.
So Enzo Anata, I think that's the name I see here. Enzo Amata, sorry, wants to know if new Apple TV hardware and our software update redesign will be shown alongside the new iPhone or at a separate event. No one knows except for Apple. My current understanding is that the Apple TV project got an incredible boost, I think sometime last year. Incredible engineering talent is working on it. There were rumors we'd see it in spring. Those rumors have it now pushed to the fall and now pushed further from the fall to next spring. So I don't know if that's because the project keeps getting increased in scale or if because there's other time factors. I don't expect to see an Apple TV. I wouldn't be hugely surprised, but I don't expect it. This fall, I think that's going to be a next spring story. But who knows?
Some fall, spring, winter, or summer, we will perhaps maybe see a new Apple TV.
Only Tim Cook knows for sure.
At some point, we will see a new Apple TV in the future.
I don't even know if we'll see a new iTunes. Yeah, I mean, I would love a new iTunes. I'd love iTunes in the cloud. I'd love something that made iTunes more relevant to me again because I would love barely open it.
I would love for iTunes to be 5 different programs.
Yes, exactly right, Derek. That is exactly what I would like to see. Talking about iTunes as a monolithic thing, it's just... it's horrible. It's like Jabba the Hutt. It's this fat, bloated thing that is malevolent.
I hate opening up an iTunes link in my browser, and it opened, or I should say, not an iTunes link, an iOS App Store link, and it opens iTunes.
What would you prefer to open, the iOS App Store on your Mac?
I would prefer it just open up in the browser like I can with Google Play or with the Windows Phone.
So here's the thing.
Windows Phone Store and just hit install and pick which phone I want it to go to.
So here's the thing. iTunes traditionally was this monolith because they had to bundle up all the stuff like Core Audio, Core Graphics, everything that makes a Mac program, and ship it over to Windows land and support it there. And supporting one program on Windows is more than anyone wants to do at Apple anyway. So it's just easier to keep it all together. So I'm hoping... and I don't think they'd want to break it up and then have to support all those things. I'm hoping exactly that will happen, that there will be an iTunes in the cloud, that not only will you be able to hit that link and it'll open up the app page, but you'll hit a link, and if you own that movie, you'll be able to watch it on the browser no matter where you are. If you don't have an Apple or iOS device, if you're traveling or you're at a family's place, iTunes itself will exist as a cloud thing. And then when you do that, sort of like iCloud, I work in the cloud. You answer anyone who's on Windows who needs that access, but you also free up the Mac app to be such a much more better thing. Is that real English?
I am perfectly okay with iTunes going back to just being, music, movies, and TV, and just being a media interface, and cutting out, make iBooks as there's an iBooks app for Mac. There's no iBooks reader for PC anyway, so it doesn't need to be in there. We can include podcasts in iTunes because podcasts is a media thing. There's no need for the iOS App Store to be in there anymore because who the hell buys apps through iTunes anymore?
Yeah, I think that's going to be even less of an issue once family sharing is available in iOS 8 because the one real excuse for it right now is managing family content using home sharing. You can spread it out across 5 computers, and each computer can have its own iOS devices that have access to that content. But that's all managed right now through a central Apple ID, and family sharing is going to change that in iOS 8, which is going to give more autonomy for people who are using their own devices and their own computers to still be part of a shared pool of resources. So, I think that paves the way for iTunes to kind of be broken up as individual special purpose apps on the Mac at some point in the future.
So Neil Douglas wants to know, what about Roku and Google stomping Apple TV? Google also announced AirPlay for their portable devices. I'm not sure what stomping is supposed to mean. I know currently Roku and Google, Amazon Fire TV offers the ability to play apps, which the Apple TV doesn't. But we won't see anything on that front until there is new Apple TV hardware that has more than a single-core A5 processor, more than 8 gigabytes of NAND flash RAM. It's just not equipped to do those things right now. We need new hardware.
Well, I think what he's referring to specifically is that recent research that came out from Parks Associates that suggested that Apple TV is somehow losing ground to Roku and Google. That Apple is now in 3rd place, according to their research. It seems like their numbers are directly contradicting other research I've seen in the past few months, including Horace Dedew over at Asimco. And I'm kind of more inclined to believe Horace at this point than I am to believe Parks Associates when it comes to the actual usage and sell-through of Apple TVs, not just domestically but worldwide. Apple said last year that Apple TV is $1 billion business for them. So I admit that Roku benefits from being able to scrape the bottom end of the market. Roku devices will work on a lot of devices that Apple TV won't, including people who are still using CRT-based televisions who don't have HD TV. My parents fell into that category. It's really interesting. They bought a Roku box. They're very happy with it. They can't use an Apple TV because, they're on a limited income. They can't go out and buy a fancy flat screen TV, especially when the one that they've got is working just fine for them.
Yeah, I mean, my mom still has a 30-inch CRT TV that works fine, and it fits in the shelf that she's always had, and she'll eventually get an LCD or something, but she doesn't now, and the Apple TV is likewise unavailable to her. So what she did is, I took iPod Touch there, and I have Apple's AV connector, and I just connected that to it. And you can do a surprising amount of stuff with that. But if you want access to all these different services, like Peter said, it's again, there's just certain markets Apple doesn't play in, and I don't think that's going to change.
No. You two just need to stop letting your parents live in the past. Buy
So
them a new TV.
My mother uses a phone, for God's sake. She's like a field hand, a caveman.
You leave Mrs. Cohen alone.
Seriously.
It's enough keeping Peter in kaiju clothes. A woman can only do so much. Rich Rossi says, I completely disagree with Derek. How about vinyl sales skyrocketing this year? People love vinyl records and having physical products. Nobody cares about having a PDF of the artwork.
Yeah, the same people.
You know what else has skyrocketed this year? BlackBerry stock. Sales are up
Wow.
50%. That means nothing in the context. Yeah, vinyl sales are up a lot. That's great for people who love vinyl and people who sell vinyl.
That's
But
great for
vinyl
Casey
sales are
List.
nothing compared to the amount of music that is purchased digitally and the amount of music that is streamed digitally. There's
And the reason why vinyl sales have skyrocketed has absolutely nothing to do with fancy album artwork either.
yeah, and craft beer sales are up tremendously in the past decade. But
Kraft makes beer now.
Anheuser-Busch still sells more beer than anybody else. I think it's Anheuser-Busch. One of those big companies, InBev, somebody like that.
One of the big beer people sells beer.
Yeah. They're selling a whole hell of a lot more beer than my favorite little breweries, but that doesn't matter in the end. It's what do I prefer? If you prefer listening to vinyl, good for you. You can keep buying vinyl, but the resurgence of vinyl in this niche market, it's temporary to begin with. It will not last. And also, I think it has nothing to do with the album art. People would buy vinyl. Yeah, album art's nice, but because they like how it sounds.
So I tried to make a Casey List joke there. I'll skip it over at this point. But I think something like iTunes LP would be a better experience on the Apple TV only because you'd have something more entertaining to watch on the screen while your music is playing. And it would be better if it wasn't bundled with albums, but was actually bundled into the single. So no matter what single you bought, you'd have an interesting visual experience to go with the audio.
Personally, when I'm listening to music, I'm not going to sit there and watch something as well.
So the Google TV spot at Google I/O is interesting because they were sort of using it as a feature that it would create this ambient visual for you when it was on your wall or something. It would show, I don't know, beautiful pictures and things like that. And I think there is some value to that. I think there is value, even if you're listening to music, that it makes your TV into an interesting piece of performance art.
And it gives the TV something to do other than just sit there and stream pictures from your photo stream. But even then, it's still, if I really want to listen to music, I'm going to close my eyes and listen to the music. And I'm probably actually going to put on a nice pair of headphones instead of listening to them on speakers, so I just hear just the music.
The only time I
might be weird in that, but when I'm listening to music, I'm either listening to the music or I'm listening to it while doing other things.
You're a musician, though.
I can see an exception to it though too, because a lot of people use their Apple TVs connected to their actual TV, so the TV becomes the hub of your home entertainment. If you're listening to music, I could see the benefit of having really sophisticated album artwork to interact with using the Apple TV, but so far that hasn't happened.
No. KJIO says Apple TV is the future. It will always be the future, and I think that's sarcastic language for. And we've talked about this before. The Apple TV business, Apple says it's getting better. They're selling millions of it, but selling millions or even tens of millions of Apple TVs pales in comparison to selling, tens of millions or hundreds of millions of iPhones or iPads. Everyone talks about, in Google, Microsoft, everyone talks about the living room being a major vector for people to enjoy digital content, but the market is just not there. Am I crazy, Derek, or is it not there, or is it fair to keep saying it's always coming but never quite arriving?
I think the market is there, but the products are not.
They're not good enough yet.
Because until a product is able to offer everything that a streaming product can offer, along with everything that I can get out of a cable box, it's not going to be as compelling as it could be. Smart TVs are kind of getting there. I'm testing one out from Sharp right now. But it's still kind of a pain to, I can hit the Netflix button, but then if I want to switch over to my cable stuff, I got to turn on the cable box and switch inputs and all this stuff. It's still a bit of a mess. And Apple TV is, while it does many things on its own, it's still yet another box that I have to hook up to my TV along with my Blu-ray player and my sound system and my cable box and whatever else I have plugged in there.
Your TV does not run WebOS?
No, it does not. Even if it did, I would still need to hook up an Apple TV if I want to stream stuff off of my Mac. And I would need a cable box to do that stuff.
So is that it, Peter? I mean, are we in the days when people had a Palm Pilot and a flip phone still, and that we need convergence? Like, you need to be able to do everything off one box before that box really becomes important to you?
I think we're headed towards the singularity, the Internet of Everything.
Fear the future.
Exactly.
All right, we're going to take a short break so I can tell you. I think I'm going to tell you about. 1 second. I'll make sure I know who I'm telling. Yes, I'm telling you about Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website, portfolio, and online store. For a free trial and 10% off, visit squarespace.com and enter code iMore at checkout. So what's cool about Squarespace is that you can make a website. I'm not talking about you, Derek, or you, Peter. I'm talking about anyone listening to this show, whether you know HTML, CSS, JavaScript. If you do know those things, great. You can make a custom website. But anyone and everyone can make a website with Squarespace. You just go, you sign up. There's a free trial, no credit card required, and you get started. It's drag and drop. It's simple and easy. It's beautiful design. All you do is, it's basically you assemble it. You know what my favorite thing is, Derek?
What?
You can do it without calling me and having me do it laboriously by hand for you.
Oh, that's amazing. I should say I've played around with Squarespace before because I had somebody who wanted to ask me about it, and it is an amazing setup. Having monkeyed around in too much HTML and CSS for my own good. If I knew better, I would go to Squarespace instead.
It just makes it easy. And, you know, Peter, all those people who come into the store that you work at, there's no store for a website. I mean, you can't go and have a real human help you do this. You have to find someone online. It's often very expensive, or you have to, you know, pick up a book, learn the skills. But with Squarespace, you can almost do collage.
Excellent. Well, you know, it certainly helps people get up and running with websites quickly and easily, and saves you a lot of the headache that's normally associated with setting one up yourself. So anything that eases those pain points, I think, is a good thing.
And that's absolutely true, because you might be able to get a family member or friend to set up a website for you, but they're not going to maintain it for you long term. And if you can't maintain it yourself, you're going to be frustrated. Squarespace, you can do it all yourself. There's even commerce. Every site comes with a store. You don't have to source that separately. Plans start at $8 a month. They include a free domain name. You sign up for a year, 24/7 support. There's really, you know, try it. Just try it for free. If you like it, please go to squarespace.com/iMore. Enter offer code iMore at checkout. A better web starts with your website. All right, so the second thing I want to talk about, Peter, is you did an awesome article about Metal and the future of Metal on OS X, and I think there's still some confusion about what exactly Metal is. And Apple described it as literally writing closer to the Metal. But it's also intricately tied with iOS, from what I understand, and that the Mac might need different solutions.
Right, exactly. Metal is very dependent on the A7 processor that's inside the iPhone 5S, the iPad Air, and the iPad Mini with Retina display. So it's great for those devices, and presumably any future ARM processor incarnations that Apple puts into its new iOS devices from here on out. But because of that hardware dependency, Metal is not suitable for OS X at all. It's not something that we're going to see ported to OS X. There's no equivalent at this point in Yosemite for it. In fact, some people who work in OpenGL and program games for the Mac were a little bit disappointed to find out that Yosemite uses the same base profile for OpenGL that's currently available in Mavericks. They were hoping for some next generation improvements, because just like Apple with Metal, the people working on OpenGL are trying to get closer to the Metal as well. It's an old programmer's expression, meaning getting as efficient with the code as possible, as close to the actual silicon on the motherboard as you possibly can. In Apple's case, it's presented huge performance benefits for certain aspects of 3D game work in iOS 8. Draw calls, for example, are 10 times faster. Draw calls determine how many objects the computer can put up on the screen at any one time, or how many effects it can apply, how much it can actually do with the visual information it's trying to convey. Those sorts of things govern the smoothness of gameplay, the realisticness of the graphics that you're seeing in your games, and has practical applications outside of gaming as well, because not only is it great for speeding up graphics, it's also great for unlocking the compute power of the parallel processing technology that's inside the A7 chip. So that means that future iOS apps could make much better use of all sorts of processing capabilities in current and future iOS devices. That sort of stuff already exists on the Mac. We've got OpenGL on the Mac side, just like we do on iOS, except it's the full OpenGL.
The big boy version.
The big boy version instead of the ES version. It's inefficiencies in this ES version that Apple is trying to work around with Metal. These inefficiencies aren't the same in the big boy version, as you put it, of OpenGL, which is great. And there's also opportunities for programmers to tap into the compute power of the graphics chips that are inside of Macs as well, with Opencl. If you'll remember, Phil Schiller talked about Opencl on stage at WWDC last year when they first gave a preview of the Mac Pro, which started shipping in December of last year. That thing's equipped with dual workstation class processors from AMD that are parallel processing monsters. Again, this is great in scientific work. This is great for any kind of digital signal work, whether it's digital video or digital audio. The Mac's core competencies when it comes to media content creation and management.
There was an interesting thing, and you had an interesting discussion with Guy English on Twitter about this, and some other people jumped in, I think, as well. But one of the things I think that's important is that, like you wrote, the Metal is targeting one chip, the Apple A7 on iOS. And yes, that's the iPhone 5S, it's the iPad Air, it's the Retina iPad Mini. But that's an incredibly stable target. On the Mac, you have not only an array of whether built like Intel HD or Iris built-in graphics or embedded graphics, but you have all the discrete cards, and you have that going back for years, which creates almost a tree of despair when it comes to targets.
Not only that, but you've got different CPUs. I mean, most Macs are shipping with Haswell chips now, but not all of them. There's still an Ivy Bridge MacBook Pro lying around, and the Mac Pro uses Xeon. There are, as you point out, discrete and integrated graphics processors across the Mac product line. Apple's obviously moving more towards integrated graphics in more and more of its machines as Intel is able to close the performance gap between integrated graphics, its own integrated graphics, and the discrete graphics that you get with NVIDIA or AMD.
Yeah, and what's interesting there is, and Guy mentioned because Apple makes the whole, I don't know if it's because Apple makes the whole chip, but Apple does make the whole A7, it's got a shared resource between CPU and GPU on mobile, which isn't the case on desktop.
Yeah, no, the interesting thing is the GPU on mobile is Power VR. It's not exactly Apple's design, but it's something that's in the chip itself, so it makes the management of memory and all sorts of other things that much easier for Apple to manage with stuff like Metal than it can on OS X. Having said all this, OS X undoubtedly suffers because of its current graphics architecture. If you take a Mac and install a game on it that runs in OpenGL and compare the performance of that game to its counterpart running in Windows on a boot camp partition on the same Mac, you'll often find that the Windows version is that much faster or is a little bit faster than the Mac version. In some cases, a lot faster. Now, having said that, you can't lay that all at Apple's feet for OpenGL or for its implementation of OpenGL even, because there are programming inefficiencies with the way that some people port games to the Macintosh. There are other differences as well, but you can't deny that there is a component of this that is directly related to the performance of OpenGL drivers. My fondest hope with all of this is that at some point or another, Apple is going to recognize what a great thing it's doing with iOS 8 and Metal, and bring closer to the Metal technology to OS X as well. That'd be super.
Would that be like a Directx kind of a thing?
It could be. AMD, for example, has a product or has an API that it makes available for game developers called Mantle. And Mantle is designed to reduce the overhead implemented with games that are running on Windows specifically. They don't rule out the possibility of it coming to OS X at some point in the future, but right now it's It's Windows specific. Speaking of Windows, Microsoft, of course, has, as you just suggested, has its DirectX product that Windows developers rely on heavily, and it's trying to get closer to the metal with that. And even the Kronos group, which manages OpenGL, is trying to implement closer to the metal type features for OpenGL as well. But it's incumbent upon Apple to actually incorporate those changes into its own system drivers, and so far it hasn't.
Hmm. See, I understand this peripherally, Derek. I don't know how you feel. End user, I know that, for example, what Peter said, if I install a game, it'll work better on Windows, which is quasi-maddening.
It is, and I'll admit my understanding of this is also sort of on the periphery of what I'm able to process. I know that being closer to the metal is better, and that just the sheer complexity of the Mac ecosystem as opposed to iOS, especially since people upgrade their iOS devices far more frequently than they're going to upgrade their Mac. And it's not just a matter of, they're starting support with the A7, but they're going to have to add in the A8 and the A9 and whatever else comes after that. With Mac, where do you draw the line with what you're going to support?
With mine, whatever I have.
Right, with wherever I am, which means that, my father, who has a slightly older Mac than mine, is going to be left out in the dark.
Well, the part that
he wouldn't really care because he's not much of a gamer, but there's so much more future complexity and historical complexity in the Mac versus what you get with the iOS devices that I'm not sure if it's worth it for Apple to dedicate all of the resources to that to begin with. Because right now, for gamers, it's PC. They want the PC. They're going to build their own PC, and they're not going to go out and buy a Mac, even if it is a powerhouse Mac Pro.
Or if they do, they're not going to buy the Mac as a gaming system. They're going to get it because they want email and web, and media management and Photoshop, or whatever it is that they're going to be doing on their Mac. They want that, but they don't self-identify as Mac gamers.
Right.
They may identify as gamers and want to game on something else, often a console or even a handheld or a mobile device, but not associate the Mac with gaming. And the thing that I want to emphasize here, though, is that the practical applications of Apple improving its OpenGL stack go way beyond gaming. Because OpenGL permeates every aspect of the way that that graphics are displayed on the Mac. So it has practical
GL, right?
Right. The very interface itself is dependent on OpenGL. So a rising tide raises all boats in that respect.
We have a couple questions about A8 and processors. So this one is from Nilesh. He says, there's a lot of discussion of Apple A8 chip, but what would you like the next-gen M8 coprocessor? This is interesting to me on many levels. We had Anand Shimp from AnandTech on Vector this week, so if you want the geeky propeller head version, go listen to Vector. I'll put it in the show notes. But this interests me because it's not clear to me where Apple could go with the A8. They went so far with the A7 with Cyclone. Peter mentioned they're still using PowerVR GPUs. I don't know if Apple ever wants to make their own GPUs. But the coprocessor thing is interesting. Right now they have a motion coprocessor. Google's already done context-aware and natural language coprocessors to make Google Voice better on the Motorola Moto X. There just seems like a lot of things, a lot of directions you can go now that they're starting to break out chipsets. But I don't know if either of you guys do, but I'm not smart enough about chipsets to know what they could do next.
I think having a voice coprocessor like the Moto X has, and there are a couple of select droids that have that Motorola put together, where I could say, "Okay, Google now," and it automatically recognizes my voice and is ready to just take commands from Google now, and it's going to be very confused by the things that I'm saying at this moment. Having that for something like Siri?
iOS 8. Yeah, you can do that with Siri on iOS 8, saying, "Hey Siri," but it has to be plugged in because it doesn't have a coprocessor.
Exactly. Having that low-power coprocessor that's just monitoring the microphone and being able to hook into that. I think there's actually a lot more that they could do with the M processor. Anyway, this might be the V8 for voice, but the M for motion is there's so much more that could be done with it. My Moto X, I pick it up, it automatically switches to the lock screen because it knows that it's been picked up. With my iPhone, if I pick it up, it does nothing until I hit a power button. There's so much awareness of its environment that can just be interpreted from how it's moving that is missing right now from at least the current implementation of iOS.
Anything on your list, Peter?
No, I'm with Derek. I think that Apple, if anything, is underutilizing the way that the motion coprocessor can be used now. So, further enhancements there, obviously. Nothing that really jumps off the page at me. Like you, Rene, I'm sort of in the boat of, not really having a clear crystal ball to look in to say this is the sort of stuff that needs to happen in the next generation. Besides, that's kind of a loser's game anyway.
Do you think Apple ever, I guess this is a really dumb question, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I think people listening would ask it. Do you think Apple ever needs to start making their own GPUs the way they make their own CPUs?
I'm sorry, are you insinuating that our listeners are stupid?
No, I'm just saying it's an obvious it's an obvious question. It's not a stupid question to ask. I think it's an impossible question to answer.
Well, it's funny you should bring that up, Rene, because that was sort of the thing that I left out of my recent editorial about Metal for OS X. Is at what point does it make sense for Apple to sort of pull in, rein in processor development for the Mac the same way that it does for iOS devices. You've pointed out many times in the past, Rene, that Apple certainly has Macs that have ARM chips installed on them. They've just never shipped them because they've never really seen the need to. The same goes for graphics. Apple tends to support a technology until it doesn't.
Yes.
Until it sort of outgrows that technology and then figures it can go its own way.
I've got a couple other questions. I think that's very astute, and I think it wouldn't surprise me. It all depends on Intel. And here's where it's interesting, Peter, because Apple could do an ARM MacBook Air, for example. I think an ARM Mac Pro is not on the current radar, but an ARM MacBook Air maybe. But Intel is I don't want to say screwing the pooch, but Broadwell is not coming as quickly as I and many other people hoped.
Well, indeed, Broadwell has been pushed back for broad availability until 2015. So Intel doesn't have that talk in their processor roadmap for vendors like Apple to enjoy to be able to ship new products. The interesting thing is that Intel has said a number of times that Skylake, which is the next generation of chip that's coming after Broadwell, is not being impacted by the delays that first hit Haswell and now are affecting Broadwell. That Skylake is still on track for release mid-year next year. So I've actually started to scratch my head and wonder if Apple's just going to sit this one out altogether and say, you know what, we're going to take a step back and we're going to wait until the LGA 1151 stuff is available and hop on with Skylake instead. You're still going to be seeing a 14 nanometer process for making those chips, so you're still going to have low power stuff. Those are the sort of stuff that Apple has really been emphasizing in its mobile devices of late, plus improved graphics performance and other efficiencies. It'd be very interesting if Apple just kind of decides not to do Broadwell at all this year. That would disappoint hardware junkies like me, who are always looking to get their hands on faster hardware, but who knows?
Well, the last rumor I heard was that the Retina MacBook Air was built on Broadwell, and that's why we didn't see it at WWDC, because it was pushed out to the fall. I don't know if those chipsets have been affected by the delays as well, but if that gets pushed in 2015, that becomes slightly annoying. I think if those rumors are true, it becomes annoying for Apple, not just for us.
The rumors that I've heard that seem to hold the most weight are that Apple has really pushed Intel to become, if not the first, one of the first vendors who will be able to ship Broadwell-based computers in any kind of quantity whatsoever. So it wouldn't surprise me at all to see Apple release something this fall and be one of the very, very few vendors on the market with a shipping Broadwell system.
So I got a question from Mickey. He says, when will Apple kill products like the A5 chips, the iPod Touch, the Apple TV, the iPhone 4S, And if they do, the iPhone's already upgraded, but would we get a new iPod Touch? Would we get a new Apple TV? My take on this is they absolutely will, but it'll be when the next generation stuff comes out. Like maybe they'll linger on as discount options the way some iPhones have. But if there's a new iPod Touch, I would expect that to be on the new platform of the iPhone, where it's bigger screens and more modern chipsets. And the new Apple TV, if it does everything that we're hoping it does, like run apps, like play games, it'll need an A7 or an A8 processor. So I think evolution takes care of that problem for us.
And putting everything on those same processors garners Apple some tremendous economies of scale that they don't have right now, doing an A7, an A6, and an A5 devices like they are doing right now. That's why they had to drop the iPad 2 ran on an A4, didn't it?
A5.
A5, okay. But dropping that means now it's just the iPod Touch and the Apple TV and that old iPhone 4S are the only ones left on that. And that's an old, they've got economies of scale from just having been manufacturing this processor for so long that they don't have to buy new equipment for it. They don't have to train anybody new how to do it. They figured out ways to make it cheaper, no doubt. But it's still it's a factory and a set of machines and workers who are building this that they could be building A8s or A9s.
The legacy support is still there in iOS 8, although it's limited. It's interesting to see that there are going to be some features and functionality of iOS 8 that are just not going to be available to you if using an older system. So the support is still there, but clearly, Apple wants to move processor manufacturing forward.
Ryan wants to know, in the next 12 months, what's more likely? The 5th generation iPod Touch is still around, or an A7 or better iPod Touch is around? Based on past history, Apple used to do an iPod Touch every year, but they've switched to every 2 years. So there was one when the iPhone 5 came out, and there was one when the iPhone 4 came out, and they sort of kept those around for 2 years, and they put a new color out or something in the interim. So if Apple holds to pattern, we'll see a new iPod Touch this year. The only thing that puts some trepidation into me is that they just released the 16 gigabyte iPod Touch with camera a couple weeks ago. And that's sort of like releasing the bumps for the iPad Air, for the MacBook Air. What does that mean about a Retina MacBook Air? I just don't know if Apple considers those separate streams in the same product line. So I think, I'm hoping, I don't know if I can say I think, but I'm hoping that we get a better iPod Touch soon. But iPod sales, they ain't what they used to be, so who knows?
It'd be nice to see a bigger iPod Touch. I think there's a case to be made for making an iPod Touch that's a really great entertainment system with a big screen. It'd be fun.
So that was interesting. I don't know if Newsroom posted it, Derek. I don't think it was you who posted it, though, about how maybe it was a Microsoft study, I forget, but how small tablets are being impacted by big phones, the sales of small tablets specifically. And we saw this like at CES, Callie Lewis and John P., friends of the show from Geek Beak TV, they don't use tablets. They don't use phones anymore. They use phablets because it's the best of both worlds for them. And I think a case will be made for people who don't want or need to have both would get a big phone rather than a small phone and a tablet.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a case to be made that my iPad Mini is portable at 7.9 inches, but it's still not fit in my coat pocket portable. Whereas having something, say the size of a Galaxy Note, which I think personally for me is too big of a phone, but that's something I could fit in my coat pocket. And it's something that's large enough that it can substitute for a tablet when need be. It's for a smaller tablet, and then I can justify having a bigger 9.7, 10.1, or 12.2 inch tablet, where I can't justify that having this.
I wonder if that big iPod Touch, Peter, or the big iPhone would, I don't know if I would get an iPod. And I like the iPad Mini. I use it for traveling. I use it as a tether. I probably would still want something as a tether because I don't want to drain my iPhone battery. But I wonder if I would be much more comfortable going with just an iPhone, 4.7 or 5.5 or whatever, and a large size iPad. If that will shift I've gone so back and forth on the iPad sizes, but I wonder if that would shift me back to the bigger iPad and a bigger phone.
I think there's a case to be made for a bigger iPod Touch. As far as the phone is concerned, well, we'll see what Apple does. It's interesting that a few years ago, I remember this. One of the analysts during Apple's quarterly conference call, asked Tim Cook if he was worried about iPads cannibalizing Mac sales specifically. And his response was no. If they're cannibalizing sales of our own products, we don't care. They're still buying our products. The same sort of applies to iPhones, bigger, smaller, iPod touches, whatever. I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah. This quickly. Anthony wants to know if anyone can confirm whether new iPhones will have specific codecs. No one can confirm anything because we can't confirm new iPhones yet. We think they're highly likely, but we'll have to wait and see what gets announced.
I can confirm because I've actually read the tarot cards and they tell me it's true.
Is there a significance, this is from Neil, of TSMC making AA chips? No, because we don't know if they're making AA chips. Again, that's supply chain rumor stuff. We'll have to wait and see. All that kind of stuff, I think they get repeated so often people think that they're confirmation, but they're really just, it's hard to... Tim Cook has said this. You look at any one sampling of data and it's not enough to extrude a pattern, much less a meaning.
Repeat a lie often enough and eventually it'll be accepted as true.
I keep trying, Peter, and it doesn't work. I want to thank lynda.com for sponsoring this episode of the iMore Show. Lynda.com helps you learn and keep up to date with your software, pick up brand new skills, and explore new hobbies with easy-to-follow video tutorials. Whether you want to learn how to make the most of an Apple devices and apps, edit video footage using Final Cut Pro 10, or build iOS apps, lynda.com offers thousands of video courses on a variety of topics. I've said this before. I am really trying, in Samuel Jackson terms, I'm trying real hard to move off of GarageBand and onto Logic for editing the podcast. And people like Dave Wiskus and Jason Snell have shown me how they use it, and it's incredibly helpful. I've been using the lynda.com tutorials, and it's not exactly, at least I haven't found exactly what I'm looking for there, but they cover so much stuff that by just watching through them, I'm picking up enough that I think very soon I'll be comfortable making the switch. And that's the cool thing for me, is that you can really sit there and just go through them subsection by subsection if you choose to. And it's nice if you have someone like Derek Kessler who could point at you and laugh and say, do better. But this kind of stuff is, if you are on your own, even if you're part of a company and you have a corporate lynda.com account, it's a great way to learn new skills. Peter, we've talked about this before. A new version of an Apple product comes out, and it's changed enough that people have a hard time, whether it's just change a version or really things have moved around. And Lynda's really fast at getting these kind of courses online.
Lynda is very fast at getting these kind of courses online. I've used lynda.com in the past to try to get up to speed on new technology that I'm trying to understand, and I've always had great success with it.
I am a big fan. Derek, if there had been a lynda.com video on how to make your standing desk, I dare say you would know which side of your plane was up.
In half the time.
Probably. I should have looked into that. I just spend too much time searching the Googles and bumbling around for hours.
So the best part of this, though, is that we've worked out a great deal with lynda.com to provide you with a special offer. You can access the entire library for free for 7 days. All you have to do is visit lynda.com/iMore. Start your 7-day trial. That includes cool stuff. There's a bunch of iOS stuff there, a bunch of development stuff, almost anything you could want. That's lynda.com, lynda.com/iMore. I want to thank them for supporting the show, and I want to thank you for supporting them. So, sort of the last thing I want to talk about today is we've been working on some accessibility stuff for iMore, which I think I can't speak. I have a tough time explaining how important it is and how inclusive it is and how empowering it is that all these devices, in ways that we take for granted, are actually accessible and usable and delightful for people who maybe have visual impairment or audio impairment or motor skill impairment or autism or some other thing that makes technology otherwise not accessible for them. So we've got a section up on iMore for it. We've got a forum devoted for it. Yesterday, I did an article on it. I've been working on that article for a while, but sort of what inspired me to finish it was this Reuters piece, where they kind of did a bit of a hatchet job on Apple about accessibility, saying that the heat was on Apple to get this finished. And the enervating part is they used a quote from Tim Cook about how hard and accessibility is and how it basically makes technology not work for people. But they left out the second part of what he said, and it was from the address that he gave when he won a Lifetime Award, which said that is the problem that Apple engineers have to solve. That is why they put so much effort into it. And it reminded me of when he was on that shareholders call, and he said, when it comes to making Apple products accessible, I don't give a damn. You think I give a bloody damn or something? Tim Cook raised his voice when it comes to the ROI on things like accessibility. So I think, first of all, shame on Reuters for doing that. If you are going to quote somebody, quote them in context. There's no such thing as manipulating a quote to service a story. Your job is the other thing. Your job is to take the information that you are presented with and report the story. It is not creative writing. That aside, I am thankful that at least it brought it to more attention, and we can do a lot more with it. Now, one of the points raised that I wanted to ask your opinion on, and all the stuff is tough, and we have no answers, we can just discuss this, is whose responsibility is it? Now, some associations are saying that companies like Apple and Google should reject apps if they're not accessible. So if a developer uploads a game or an app and it's not accessible, it doesn't have accessibility features, it should be rejected from the store. Is that reasonable? Should there be, for example, federal and state legislature, just like there are for some workplaces, that say if they're not accessible, those apps are basically illegal? Derek, do you have any opinions on this?
I believe that it is on developers to make their apps accessible. I do not believe they should be required to make their apps accessible, no more than I'm required to install a ramp and an elevator in my house. Making an app accessible is work, yes. But if it helps open up your app to a broader audience, that's great. That's on each developer's own decision to decide whether they're going to make their app accessible to open it up for a broader ecosystem. It's something they should do, yes, and something they should be encouraged to do and have tools to make it as easy as possible to do. But my little libertarian streak says they shouldn't be required to do that because it's their app. But then again, I also think it's a good idea to have exit signs and wheelchair ramps for public businesses.
So just to point out, Apple does a phenomenal job on iOS itself. They have teams that take care of security. They have teams that take care of performance. They have a team that takes care of accessibility, that goes around and tries to make apps more accessible, not only internal apps, but they evangelize. They make a lot of tools. If you build a Mac app with AppKit or you build an iOS app with UIKit, you get tons of this stuff for free. You have almost a fully accessible app for free. It's only when you do things like games or things like completely custom apps that you have to worry about accessibility. Peter, do you think there's a middle ground, like maybe Apple could say, we're not going to feature apps if they're not accessible? Or is even that too strong?
I even think that's too strong. I think that, as Derek points out, it's incumbent upon the developers themselves to adopt the technology, and obviously everybody's going to have a threshold for doing that. An indie developer who's creating his first game, or her first game, maybe working out of their home, or maybe doing it part-time while they're doing other things, and may just not have the resources to implement accessibility controls as effectively as they possibly could. Somebody like that doesn't deserve to be overlooked for plaudits, whether it's curation in the App Store or anything else, simply because it doesn't work. Where I guess it comes into play more is overall holistically, how does it affect the ecosystem? And as you point out, Rene, Apple makes it very, very easy to implement those capabilities. So developers can make those decisions and say, you know what, it makes sense for our apps to do this, so let's do this. And there are certainly a lot of motivated developers, Rene. You and I hear from them every day, almost every day, from developers who want to take advantage of accessibility technology in iOS 8 or have apps that they're looking to promote. So, this is a burgeoning area, but I don't think that Apple needs to necessarily make it mandatory or penalize developers for not doing it.
There's a lot of questions about some apps, like how would I make, say, Angry Birds accessible to the blind? Is it going to read aloud what just happened? You flung a bird and it knocked over some blocks and killed a pig. There's something.
That would be cool.
Yeah, it would be cool. It'd be like playing it on a BlackBerry.
That's your second BlackBerry attack today, sir. I am Canadian, let me remind you.
Oh, I'm so scared.
Derek's being just a wee bit racist today.
Devices.
So it's a question of, there are some things, I agree that the majority of, say, apps should definitely be made accessible. There's no reason, say, ESPN Score Center should not be something that is relatively accessible because all it is, it's presenting data, and most of it is text data that can be read aloud, or the text can be made bigger, or the controls can be made easier for people who, with Parkinson's, who have a difficulty with hitting smaller buttons. But when it comes to games, I'm not sure how you can make most games even accessible to begin with.
Well, there's different kinds of accessibility. Like I think there's accessibility, like something that is highly visual, might not be accessible to the blind, but maybe it can be accessible to those with hearing impairments, or maybe it can be accessible to someone with motor impairments, or other things. I think accessibility and it's horrible that it gets grouped all together and lumped into one thing. And Natalia, we just recorded a debug episode with Natalia, and she was explaining how it shouldn't be viewed really as accessibility. It should be viewed as a way that makes it open to everybody, whether they're kids or whether they're really, or old people, or people who have just never held an electronic device before, never had an iPad or iPhone. It's a matter of design. It's designing a good app, and this should be part of the design process for a good app. But I think it's absolutely fair. Like I think it is hard when you have governments regulate, or even when you have platform owners regulate. I think it becomes problematic, but I think it's absolutely fair if we vote with our wallets and we vote with our words, and when we find apps that can be accessible and aren't, we point that out, or we support the ones that are. And I think that as long as we're consistent with it and we do think about it and we give voice and attention to that aspect of apps and programming, I think that provides tremendous value.
Agreed.
So say we all.
Easy sell. All right, Peter, am I forgetting anything? Was there anything you wanted to talk about this week?
No, I don't think so. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that to sound as abrupt as it was. No more.
I can't take it anymore.
No, I think we've covered the gamut of what we've been ruminating on the site anyway.
There's one last thing I want to bring up then, and it's kind of interesting, and I don't think it's really. Well, I'll just put it out there. So there was two interesting things. One is there was a profile of Tim Cook in the Wall Street Journal, and I enjoy the Wall Street Journal. I enjoy the writer. But it was odd to me for a couple of reasons. One is that it was basically saying how this is Tim Cook's Apple, and it's been Tim Cook's Apple for maybe 3 years now. And I think it's great the mainstream press is recognizing that, but I think it's odd, that now it's becoming a thing. But John Gruber pulled out something that was interesting, because part of the narrative of this article was that Tim Cook might be spreading Apple too thin, that he might be trying to do too many things with Apple, which is such a 180 whiplash-inducing thing from the previous narrative, which is that Tim Cook's not doing enough, that Apple's not releasing new products, that everything's a horrible failure, and creates this.
They haven't released any new products.
Well, no, but it creates this incredible dichotomy that he called it damned if you do, damned if you don't. But it seems like it's prep work. It's setting Apple up to fail no matter what happens this fall. And I juxtapose that with Samsung, who just had their earnings result, and they came in below estimates. And it turns out that people looking for a premium phone still tend to gravitate towards iPhones, and maybe even more so when large screen iPhones come out. And people who want just any phone go by what's cheapest, and Samsung is not always the cheapest. And with companies like Xiaomi and other Chinese vendors coming out, it'll be very similar to the PC market, where the Dells and the HPs and the Lenovo's and the Asuses fought over almost zero margin. And all of this happening at the same time was very interesting to me, because it seems like, and I am completely prejudiced about this, that no matter what happens, we now know how Apple is going to be doomed again.
Yeah, just Apple is doomed overall. But on that lower end of the market, we've seen companies like even Motorola with the Moto G and the Moto E. They're not the cheapest phones out there, but they are good phones, actually really good phones for the price. And they sold enough of the Moto G and the Moto E in India to take the number 3 spot, when India is a huge market. And granted, they're behind, and that's the number 3 spot ahead of Samsung.
Yeah.
And just selling those low-end phones. Granted, they're not making a whole lot of profit off of them. And of course, that's always that's going to be a market that Apple is going to generally leave untapped. They're not going to release I don't see Apple releasing a new low-end phone anytime soon, because they believe in releasing the best product they possibly can. And if that means that the lowest-end Mac laptop you can buy is going to be $1,000, then so be it. and that's how Apple operates. They may still sell the old iPhone, but that's the stratification between people buying, the quality stuff versus just shopping based on price. It's something we see in a lot of markets. There's still people who go out and buy a Sony TV, or they go out and buy was it Panasonic or Samsung that was just discontinued plasmas, and they'll go out and
Panasonic did last year, Samsung this year.
Yeah, they'll go out and plop down $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 on the best TV they can, and then there are other people who are going to go to Walmart and look at the wall of TVs and figure out what the biggest TV they can get is for as little as possible. And I think smartphones are definitely going the same way. People will go out and they will buy a iPhone 5S or a Galaxy S5. And actually, that's probably all they're going to really consider. They may consider a Galaxy Note as well, but sadly, as much as I love my HTC One, nobody's buying it, even though it's a fantastic phone. And the other group of people are going to walk in and say, I have $100 to spend on a smartphone. What can I get? Or they can, conversely, actually, they're mostly asking, what smartphone can I get for free? Because contracts.
Yeah, Peter, do you pull anything out of this? Is this just mainstream media being mainstream media and markets being markets, or is there a larger pattern emerging?
There's no pattern emerging. It's garbage. This is just mainstream media being mainstream media.
All right. On that note, I like ending the show when Peter saying it's garbage. That's awesome. On that note, Peter, if people want to read more of you, if they want to find more of you, if they want to just be involved with more of you, where can they go?
iMore.com and on Twitter at Flarg, Flargh.
And Derek Kessler?
You can find me all over the Mobile Nation sites, writing all of the news on Android Central and iMore and Crackberry and even WP Central. And yes, Crackberry, I may be mean to them every now and then, but it's out of love.
Well, you just ignored
and you can find me on the Twitters at DKDSGN.
Awesome. You can find me at Rene Ritchie. You can find me at iMore.com as well. Peter, Derek, thank you so much. There was a problem with the chat room today, so I couldn't get that going. I apologize if anyone was stuck in there. But if you were in there, if you were in the QA engine asking us your questions, thank you all so much. The show is so much better to have you involved. If you can, please join us live. We really are going to be moving the show to 2 p.m. starting next week.
Lies.
That's 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m., 7 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Being here live is the absolute best way to enjoy the show. If you miss it live, however, you can get it on iTunes. You can get it from RSS. Both the audio and the video usually goes up within a few hours to a day, depending on how horrible YouTube is being to us at any given time. Other than that, we will see you guys next week. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Derek.
Bye.
See ya.